leadership layers lecture on very interesting topic, that is upskilling and employee engagement. And we have Dr. Amelie joining us from United Kingdom, and she's joining us at a very challenging situation. In fact, as you can see, she's joining us from her car because of some technical glitches. Thank you so much, Dr. Amelie. And before I invite her to the platform, let me have the pleasure of introducing her. And very exemplary career, I would say, right? Very, very illustrious career. And like you said, spanning about 23 years plus. After her master studies from University of Oxford, she did her PhD, Doctor of Business Administration from Cranfield University. After that, she had, like I said, her wakeful, I would say, the corporate career started with Union Pictures and Natural Nylon as a development officer from 2000 to 2001. That's 1 year she was there. And after that, she was the researcher at Instinet Corporation, where she was for 1 year, 1 month. And she was also consultant at PVD Consulting for 2 years. After that, she was with Duke Corporate Education, where she was for, totally for 6 years, last being the Director of Business Development, Europe and Africa, formerly the Project Director. And after that, she was with the Corporate Executive Board as Senior Engagement Manager and Solutions Practice for about 1 year, 1 month. And since after that, she was a Managing Director at Duke Corporate Education again, where she was wearing this hat for 3 years, right? And after that, she was the Executive Development, in Singapore, in the global role, where she was handling this role for 6 months. After that, she was with the Google for 3 years, the last assignment being the head of business leadership development for between April 2015 and October 2017. After that, she was with UBS, and where she was with the UBS for 3 years, and the last assignment being Global Head of Innovation and Transformation for Talent and Recruiting. And that was between April 2020 and August 2020. And since September 2020, she's with Standard Chartered Bank, and that's about 3 years, 2 months now. And currently, she's the head of global head of learning at Standard Chartered Bank. And she's an experienced leader of global organizational transformation. And she currently leads global learning organization through massive modernization and digitalization to drive performance and growth. And like I said, she has about 20 years plus experience in building and running a portfolio of complex change initiatives. And today, like I said, she's going to be talking to us on very, very interesting topic, which I'm sure, like I've written in the chat box, will have a lot of implications for each one of her careers because of her global experience and also having led from the front several such initiatives. And given that today is a match between India and Pakistan, Dr. Amelie, I think we still have wonderful participation, but I'm sure all of them are looking forward to great insight from you. Over to you, Dr. Amelie.
Thank you very much indeed. Can you hear me? Let me just check that. You can? Okay, great. Listen, I am so honored to be invited to talk with you today, and I'm really, really honored to be able to talk about a topic that I love so much. I'm so sorry that I have to join you from my car. As was mentioned, my internet gave out, so I've driven in my car to a field where at least I can be seen and heard, if not share PowerPoints. And if it's of interest to you to have a PowerPoint summarizing what I was planning to discuss today, afterwards, I'd be very happy to provide one. So apologies for the slightly informal surrounding, but happily we can connect. So, and again, thank you very much for the very kind introduction. I must say, listening back to my career, which is odd, it makes me sound like I have done a lot of moving around, which is probably true, but actually kind of related to the career development and skill journey that I now found myself on behalf of the bank as well as myself, right? So I promise it all kind of makes sense when you sit down and think about it. The fact is that I've always been obsessed with transformation ever since I joined the world of work, and I see huge opportunity and have always done so to use learning and education to do extraordinary things with people that wouldn't otherwise be connected. And that really has been a motivation behind my career choices to date, and very much remains one. So if it sounded kind of odd and slightly schizophrenic, my career, I assure you it made sense, and it continues to make sense to me at least. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about skills, a kind of new way of thinking about skills and career engagement and employee engagement, which was the ask. And for me, this breaks down into a few different examples that I wanted to share. Before I do that, though, there are three big drivers that I think make it really important that we think about skills and careers and actually the world of work differently today. So I wanted to go through those first. The first kind of big driver, which either leads to a sense of anxiety or a sense of, I guess, activism, is the fact that what we need to perform in a role changes much, much more quickly than we can ever be prepared for if we only rely on school and university. And because the shelf life of skills is so much shorter than it has been, because the new jobs that are coming onto the market are very different and actually accelerated by digital transformation, I think many would argue. It puts in stark contrast the rather more worrying fact that actually this massive revolution in the types of skills and the kinds of skills that are important, because there are some members of the population globally that are just being left out. Right. So when you look at the workplace, not just in Standard Chartered, but more globally, I think most surveys would show you that the roles that are currently in decline or at risk of most being adjusted are the roles that typically are filled by the most diverse candidates. Right. So the people who we want in our workplace the most, because they're diverse and they bring new perspectives and they help us to grow and change in ways that we maybe can't predict, are the people that are most at risk of this acceleration of disruption of skills. Moreover, because the skills that are required in the workplace are quite specialist and hard to find often, it can be quite expensive to find them, which means that they are even more not in the right place, in the right country, in the right university, right? So we are actively putting diverse candidates at risk of not being able to gain critical skills by the velocity at which those skills change. That's, I think, a second really important point. I think the third point I can't really go into given what's going on tragically around the world today. But I think it's very fair to say that, you know, there is a huge sense of political and economic disorder at the moment, which makes it very difficult for learners to reach across borders and access communities of practice, access skills, access education in the way that they might have been able to in more peaceful times. So I guess the first point I wanted to make is the most depressing point that I will make, which is, look, if skills accelerate in terms of our need for them, and their shelf life decreases in terms of how long we can use them for, and their criticality increases, but their accessibility decreases, then we find ourselves in a real situation where it is important now more than ever to pay attention to skills, but it's also important that we make those skills accessible to people who may not otherwise be able to develop them. That's the first point. The second point is really around careers. So, you know, when I joined the world of work, what feels like a million years ago, you could probably look forward to a quite linear career. I mean, you heard, I actually had a relative stepping from one place to the other and kind of following my interest. But, it was not unusual for me to ask and for me to be asked 20 years ago, what do you want to do in 5 years' time? What do you want to do in 10 years' time? Whose job do you want to have next? So this idea of a linear pathway was pretty well established. Since then, obviously, so let's say since 20 or 30 years, I mean, the global population has doubled. The connection points across the world that companies have radically increased, and the level of personal visibility and transparency that digital has brought to us has radically that instead of having this linear career where you're sitting in the same office as your boss and you're hoping one day to be promoted to your boss, actually, for many people, the world of work feels quite different, right? It feels that my boss might be in another location. Thanks to COVID, I might not have even met my boss ever. Thanks to COVID, or even before COVID, actually my team might be a very global team, and therefore the idea that I would sit and have a gold-plated best practice to follow is probably quite out of date, right? Especially in this accelerating, exciting, quite volatile and complex world that we live in today. It's just not the case that best practice always, right? Often we have to build new practice. Often we have to experiment. Relying on what got us to where we were, relying on very linear structures is not very helpful. Moreover, what large employees are finding, ourselves included, is that as we have built this kind of structure that relies on quite a lot of linear progression, we find it very hard to access the skills that are required in a fast enough way, which really hampers our productivity. I think most big companies today struggle at some point or another with productivity. And one of, I believe, the core reasons to this is because it's just hard, even if you have the right people, it's hard to move them around at the speed that's required. Fungibly enough, and get access to the skills that are surgically required in the right time frame, right? So actually all of the way that we've thought about jobs and skills and careers is kind of holding us back from being productive at a company level. At an individual level as well, I mean, you only have to have teenage children and ask them what they want to do in 10 years' time. And I think most of them will have an idea about a direction of travel, but certainly this idea that you would go and stay in a company for 30 years or even longer just no longer seems to resonate based on all the research that I see, as well as my own children's interactions with me about their careers. That is even more important to think about because it looks like there may come an era quite soon where we actually live as human beings for about 100 years, right? So if we have an extended life expectancy, that means we have an extended expectancy at work, right, to be productive. And the idea that if a 30-year career or a 40-year career in one company kind of going up the line was no longer feasible nor desirable, certainly the idea that we would extend that in time is absolutely not viable either. I think it's important to note as well that organizations are under much more public scrutiny by employees about what they stand for, their actions, the actions of the individuals within them than they have been before. People are making much more deliberate choices about the companies that they want to join than they might have done, for example, when my father joined the world of work, right? So when you combine that with the fact that organizations as skills is much shorter, you get this really interesting kind of paradigm where today's workforce or new workforce entering the workforce cares a lot about who they work for. They probably have very little intention of staying with the same company unless it really delivers the purpose and the values that they want and helps them to learn and grow. And their expectation of staying in one place for 30, 40 years is pretty minimal. So why is that important? Well, it looks like we have, this high velocity, high change, high complexity world of skills, which I described in my first point. It looks like we have a kind of declining usefulness of career pathways, a declining usefulness of productivity, and a declining appeal of a linear pathway, as my second point. The third thing I will say is that I think companies and universities and business schools have not quite got it right in terms of the educational support on offer for today when it comes to the world of work, right? So I touched on this before, but you cannot learn digital skills quickly enough in university to deploy them for very long when you enter the world of work. That's just the fact. If I look at, for example, a really interesting emerging area like cybersecurity, there are 77 new role types that have emerged over the last 3 years. How can we possibly, with such a high velocity of roles, expect universities to do the jobs that they used to do in preparing people for those kinds of roles, right? So the onus is much more on employers than I think it ever has been to get people ready to be productive at work, to give people access to the skills that they actually need that are useful. When I think back about my time at Google, one of the really interesting findings that sticks with me to today is how unprepared academia was to support organizations as they went through waves of digital transformation. There were academics who wrote very thoughtfully about it and continue to write very thoughtfully about it. But for the first, I would say, 4 or 5 years, where companies were going through digital transformation at a rate faster than academia could support their understanding. It was interesting to see in that void how more practitioner research and other organizations had to take a more leading role. And I think that trend is going to accelerate, right? So this partnership between organizations, academia, NGOs is going to have to grow in order to support our kind of global knowledge base and our global talent base as we continue to accelerate. If I think about some of the really critical skills that I would look for in any role, of course, some of them are technical, but a lot of those skills are about how to think, how to collaborate. And again, those were never on a university course when I was at university anyway. So it just feels like this new emergence of kind of big critical skills draws even more strongly the point that actually the world of education is not preparing us enough for the kinds of skills that we need in order to advance in our careers. So those are the 3 points. And what I've seen over the last few years as I sort of wrestle with these points for myself, for my company, and just for the people that I work with, is there are 2 ways and kind of go into fuel safe mode and try to wait until there's a kind of general reset to fall into, is to view it with and actually some optimism as well. I think it's a really interesting and exciting time to be in the world of work, but only if you're prepared to change, only if you're prepared to learn and grow at a rate that you probably weren't learning and growing at before. So those are the 3 kind of initial levers that I wanted to point out. I hope that's clear. What I will now turn to is kind of what have companies been doing about it and where I can see companies going in the future. I hope that's all right. But please do, feel free to interrupt me if you would like me to go in a different direction. So if those are the levers, what are companies doing about it? Well, look, as a head of learning, and I've been a head of learning in multiple roles, as was very kindly showed at the beginning in my CV. This is my third turn at being head of learning kind of globally. What I've seen is that companies that have lived in a world of best practice tend to have evolved a huge amount of research when it comes to what I would call role-based learning, right? So how to be a finance manager, how to be a risk leader, how to be a business analyst, how to be a data scientist. And those are absolutely amazing. Those are really important. But if you think back to points 2 and 3, they actually reinforce one the big problems that we have today, which is that when you go into this kind of linear progression of learning, it makes you less productive and less able to flex into new skills because you've built this expertise over time. And I'm not saying, just to be absolutely clear, that expertise and technical expertise is not valuable or is less valuable. It absolutely is. However, there has to be an accompanying set of skills that are built that allow you to flex as the world of work and the work that you do flexes. For example, as long as you can flex coding languages, you're about 50% of the way there in any kind of digital area that you want to be in. But the other 50% of what you have to be really good at is your ability to collaborate.
Kindly excuse, I think because of some technical glitch from Dr. Amelie's end, just give us some time for her to join back. And my colleague has been saying, please do put your questions. Thank you, Durga Prasad. I'm sure Dr. Amelie will address your question, right? And a very interesting question, by the way. But the rest of you, and anybody who has any question related to upskilling and employee engagement, how they are related, and especially from the point of view of the three key levers that she was talking about, I think they're phenomenal. That applies to every work environment, not just any specific company or MNC. It applies to every company, because at the end of the day, it's all about global village. So I think by the time earlier, like people say, maybe it will take a few years for some best practice to get cascaded. But with the digital transformation and digitalization, I think the I would say the percolation is super fast now. So I think any best practice, and the same breath, even the worst practice also is getting I would say accelerated in no time. So therefore, please do put your question, and I'm sure Dr. Amelie, Nandita, please check with Dr. Amelie if she is able to come back.
Yes, I'm just trying.
I think, unfortunately, she has some very big technical issue because of which she's joining us from her car, actually, right? And hopefully, she should be back soon. And I must thank all of you for joining today's session, despite the blockbuster match that's on anvil between India and Pakistan. Thank you so much for joining us. And not just questions, I would say, if you have any other perspective, you're most welcome. I think Dr. Amelie is back. Yeah, I think we can see you. And maybe you can put off video so that it can save some bandwidth, Dr. Amelie.
Can you hear me?
No, it's just breaking, Dr. Amelie. Maybe you can switch off your video and maybe we can just have the audio.
All right, I will. Can you still hear me? I am sorry about that. I just suddenly got dropped.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, I just switched off my video. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, I think we can hear you now.
Okay,
Loud and clear.
wonderful. I went on. Okay, good. Well, look, I'm not sure how long I went on before I got cut off, so apologies. The point I was trying to make is that what I found is that um, as we have built people who are very, very strong technical experts, what we're finding is that those technical experts are finding it really hard to move around the organization or other organizations as effectively as we would want, right? So I have data that shows that the best performing investment bankers, when put in other teams, actually underperform. I have similar data as it relates to coders. And so this idea of really refocusing on the types of skills that we want to learn and how we teach people has become really, really important for every head of learning, but I think also for every top performer that is looking after their career in a kind of active way. What I found to be very specific is that there's a new class of skills at Standard Chartered. We're calling them human skills. I think other organizations call them differently, but these class of skills that revolve around empathy, critical thinking, collaboration, effective leadership. Those are as important, if not more important, to unlock your success in terms of your career. And I find almost every company has not spent enough time building those types of skills. One of the reasons for that is because, in general, a lot of learning has been focused at an individual level. I personally am totally addicted to like certification, to learning, as certificates. I go to edX. I have done a number of certificates there. I've just done a storytelling one with Pixar. And I just spend a lot of my time, my free time, learning kind of what I believe to be interesting bits of knowledge. But I cannot apply any of those bits of knowledge unless I spend as much time, if not more time, figuring out how to work with others using those skills. This is something that Standard Chartered, I think, has done a very, very good job at in terms of building out a lot more social approaches to learning. By that, I mean leaders learning together, leaders taking short-term assignments. We have this fantastic platform called Talent Marketplace, which allows people to post kind of gigs and short-term assignments that you can do without having to leave your role. And I really do see that becoming more and more important as we go forward and manage our own careers, right? Finding these opportunities to do different things all the while staying in your role, if you can do it, I think is absolutely critical. Spending more time earlier on, thinking about how you perform in a team, how you show up, how you influence others, how you collaborate, how quickly can you make complex decisions, and how effective are those decisions. That's where I'm spending a lot more of my time, honestly, for my own learning and also for the learning of the bank. So I guess what I wanted to do was to land on two different examples of this new way of learning that I thought you might find relevant. One example comes from our reskilling portfolio. So we have spent the last 3 years taking very specific job-to-job reskilling routes and looking at how we can enable people who are in roles that are rapidly changing to take on roles for which there is a global talent shortage. One example is what we call a universal banker, right? So these are bankers that have not existed 3 years ago, but 3 years ago you might have been a banking teller, or you might have been, something else. And I think what has made this reskilling route really successful is that we have 5 or 6 elements that have supported people's ability to redeploy. So first thing that we have done, and that I believe is really critical, is we start with a values-based diagnostic that allows people to think about what kinds of values they want to bring to work and what kinds of experiences they might want that will help them. The reason why this is important is because if you just simply say to people, hey, your job is changing, don't you want to reskill? bizarrely enough, I found that most people are not willing to reskill with that narrative, right? I found this also at one of my former employers. If you approach a group of people who've been in the workplace for a while and you say, gosh, it looks like your job's changing, how about retraining for something else? Most of them don't start from a place of excitement and enthusiasm. However, when you start with this values-based, it actually helps people to think about what they are getting out of work, not just reacting to the threat of their job changing. The second thing that we've done is we built out a series of brain training games. Now, I know in your head you're thinking about, IQ tests and things like that. It's actually not what I mean. What we've done is we've very specifically isolated core, what I would call micro skills that you just need to have a lot of practice in if you're going to be effective in role. I'll give you an example. If you are a data scientist, you are very, very practiced at understanding data sets and seeing where there might be problems very quickly. To prepare for a data scientist role, yes, you can go and do lectures. Yes, you can understand the theory of good versus weak data sets. But actually, you only really understand and practice that muscle when you look at 20 different data sets every day over a number of days or weeks or months. So what we've done is we've designed a brain training game to do just that, right? So you play it 2 minutes a day, 5 days a week for 5 weeks in a row. And you literally sit and look at 20 rapid fire data sets and just practice spotting weaknesses and spotting strengths and patterns. And so this kind of idea of core muscle building has been a really valuable part of how we've started to think about reskilling. And I would encourage you, whatever role you're thinking about next, to think about what are the micro skills that you can actually practice without having to go to a big lecture or without having to put people through, extremely long pieces of learning. So brain training games have been very successful. The second thing that we've done that has been really helpful has been to establish mentors. Now, I know, I hope that all of you have had a positive mentoring experience so far. If not, I would really encourage you to think about one because it's just made what can be an intimidating role for a diverse candidate into a much more human role. And it creates advocates out of hiring managers who otherwise are less interested in taking a bet on someone who doesn't have that job title already. So we found that the use of mentors has really helped us to be much more inclusive in terms of the candidates that we go after. The third thing that we've done is we've just reshaped and modernized the kind of traditional formal certified learning that we have. We've done away with excessive 200-hour learning programs. We've done away with kind of overly long lectures, and we've really made things much more digestible and consumable with accessible tests. This is something that I think is really important and is going to be a game changer going forward. As more of the population requires more accessible content and more accessible ways of testing your knowledge, whether that's neurodiverse candidates, whether that's candidates in different languages, or simply candidates that have other special needs around whether they can hear or whether they can see in line with other people. So making accessible, short, modern learning has been a really big and valuable step for us. The third thing that we've done, which I think has been very helpful, has been to give people an opportunity to practice a day in the life of some of these new roles and get feedback. I think the use of simulation cannot be understated as we go through, because where there are multiple right answers to any decision that you take, which is the case the more senior you get, it's really important to have an opportunity to practice and also to get feedback from someone in role who will say, oh, interesting that you chose this. Actually, I've done that, and that. And all of those things, had moments where they were positive as well. So I think the use of simulation has been quite helpful. Finally, I think working with hiring managers and as an organization to reassure people that if you take people into a new role, you're not just putting them in the seat and then leaving them, but actually you're committing to developing them over the long term has been really important, right? And again, it kind of changes the dynamic around hiring. 5 years ago, what we would say is, oh, well, we'll fill the role for you. And then there was no real mention of what to do afterwards. You sort of handed it over to learning. Today, what we're seeing is that the boundary between learning and hiring is much less than it was before. And I think when we as learning and talent management professionals are able to commit to building not just someone who can go into role and succeed, but actually someone who can be a thought leader in that role. I think that's really important. So that's one example I wanted to describe in a bit more detail around a reskilling approach that has worked for us. Another example that I wanted to share is actually from our leadership portfolio, and it speaks to what I was describing before, which is the building of these social skills. I think we're not alone in terms of our position as a kind of complex, large global company. That a lot of what we do transcends boundaries, transcends roles, transcends kind of technical skills. We're struggling, as are many companies, to make sure that we collaborate in the right way. And therefore, it's more important than ever that we give our leaders an opportunity to work together, because there are trade-offs that we cannot just simply tell them to deliver on. There are trade-offs that they have to make day to day that we cannot prepare for. We just have to give them the intent and then let them experiment and move forward on their own. And so because of that, what we've done is we've developed a stack of leadership learning that enables this platform for collaborative, I'm going to call it collaborative experimentation, right? We have really stripped away the idea that somebody smart from an academic, university comes and talks at you and you take notes, and then at the end you have a little test, and then that's it. And we've really walked into a much more open space for learning where leaders learn together. One example of that I'll take from our core leadership proposition, which is for every first-time leader. This year, I think we've reached about 3,000 of our first-time leaders in this program, and it's intended to set them off in the right direction as they lead teams and they make these trade-offs and these decisions in the bank. What we've done is we invite them in, and we've actually built 3 kind of live case studies that they can work through of companies that are in different contexts. And what we do is from the very beginning, they have to work together in teams. And the cases that they go through are not Socratic cases like the type that you would find at Harvard or in any kind of publication. They are live cases where the information is delivered through meetings and through collaboration. And so the idea is that it's a very real, quite intense way for a team to quickly establish that actually, even if you're the smartest person in the room, it actually makes no difference. What's really important is that you agree upfront, what's our process for gathering information, what's our process for making decisions, what's our process for collaborating, and then how do we give each other feedback? Because at the end of every case, and there are 3 in total, you actually get about 28 or 29 points of feedback for your team. And there is a kind of global leaderboard and a global score that you get. If you fall below a certain rate, over the 3 case studies, which exist over 2 days, you're actually told that you have to resit the entire program. You're given a set of learning materials that you can go away and study, and then you need to go back and try again. The idea being that if you don't learn these skills, they're so important that you really need to spend a lot more time thinking about it and practicing them again. So it's quite visible. We rely very heavily on practitioners and from our own internal leaders to give this kind of very micro feedback points, whether it's on the analytics of how someone has approached a problem, how someone has read a financial statement, how someone is talking about transformation, how someone convinces or doesn't convince, a key talent to keep their career within the company. I think it's a helpful example because I think there are actually more opportunities for us to safely practice and get feedback on some of these core skills than you might realize. Um, and I would just encourage everyone to take every opportunity to try to do that kind of practice, to try to walk a mile in another organization's or another leader's shoes and get feedback on how they take in information and make decisions and communicate with people, because I think you can learn a lot. So, look, at the risk of going on too long, I promised I would talk for about 30 minutes. I've obviously blown that out of the water. But let me take a pause for breath there. Just to summarize, what I tried to outline is that there are three main drivers why I think it's really important and exciting that we look again at skills. And that there are actually some new skills that are emerging that are even more exciting and critical. Some of them are very visible, some of them are less visible. I highlighted the difference between some of the new technical skills and some of the new collaborative, or let's call them human skills, and why it's really important that we develop those two in concert with one another. I talked a little bit about the role that organizations can play that is new in helping employees to learn alongside academia and alongside governments. I talked a little bit about how skills development deserves more attention than ever before, because with the resetting of the global population and the resetting of access to skills, unless we're careful, we're actually going to do ourselves out of the diverse workforce that we all want if we're going to continue to remain exciting and innovative as organizations and interesting and informed as employees alongside our colleagues. Then I gave you a couple of examples of how some organizations are changing their learning portfolios, including ourselves, with the use of games, of simulations, of social learning, and a move to include not just role-based learning, but much more leaders learning together. And then I gave you two specific examples of reskilling that I thought you might find helpful. One being the universal banker and some of the elements that I think have made that successful. And then another one being one of our leadership programs. So I hope that was not too boring. Again, good that you don't have to look at me in my car. Sorry that we dropped for a moment or two in the middle. Maybe what I'll do now is see if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amelie. I appreciate, and we have quite a few, but then for positive time, and especially from your point of view, I think we'll take a few questions. Is that okay?
Yes, that sounds great.
Yeah, there's a first question from Mr. Durga Prasad Brahmavar, and his question is, awesome session, barring few technical snags. Can you please tell me how do we segmentize the life of skills, and how can we be the leader of executing new skills? Thank you, Durga Prasad.
Wow, that's an amazing question. Quite a big question for and really well phrased. I love it. Look, I think how to understand the shelf life of skills. I don't think there's a very scientific way of doing it, although I think if you're a consultant, you might argue with me. I tend to see skills in about 2 or 3 year chunks. Because when I look at the rate at which I need to totally refurbish my learning portfolio, some of those skills are not even lasting 3 years anymore. I told you before that there are 77 new roles that have emerged in cybersecurity in the last 3 years. There are over 80 roles that I've had to kill in cyber in the last 3 years. And the same is true for many of the other roles. So I think at the role level, the velocity is about 2 to 3 years. At the skill level itself, there are technical skills where I think the shelf life is even shorter and shortening further. I talked a little bit about coding. I talked a little bit about kind of core technical or technology-based skills, and I think the emergence of knowledge is so quick that our ability to use new tools and techniques needs to be constantly kind of reinvented. At the same time, there are some skills that are beginning to look like they're quite ubiquitous, that they're quite evergreen, right? So the ability to influence, to collaborate, to make effective decisions, I think that's never been more important than today. And I think the shelf life of that is getting longer and longer, or maybe conversely, we're getting poorer and poorer at making decisions and at collaborating. But I think the pressure to perform in those skills is much higher than it was before. And I think the shelf life is actually extending. And I think it comes earlier in the workplace than it ever has done before. If I look at the education of my children, for example, they are already now starting to build core leadership skills, or what I would call core leadership skills, even at school, in recognition of the fact that actually, if you don't have those, it's very hard to survive in any workplace. So I don't think that neatly answers your question, but I would say it's a two-part question, or rather a two-part answer to your question, depending on what kinds of skills you're thinking about.
Thank you, Dr. Amelie. Now, I think this question is related to one of the things that you're mentioning some time back, Dr. Amelie. That's about mentoring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
in the ever-changing the skill space, would it be a good idea actually for companies to start nurturing the idea of reverse mentoring, Dr. Amelie, in the sense that the people who are joining the workforce with the latest, the young people, just about Gen Zers kind of thing, they come to the companies with the latest skill set. But the people who have been in the companies for 20 years, 25 years, and maybe 30 years kind of thing, they might lack some of these skills. So therefore, would it be a good idea for the companies to start forming some sort of strategic focus groups or whatever you call it, and therefore the young people or the Gen Zers actually start mentoring the senior people. So therefore, there is going to be some sort of convergence in the company at some point of time.
So I love that. I think that's a really, really valuable strategy. Standard Chartered has a special group of people that are kind of young high achievers called the Future Makers, where we, explicitly do this reverse mentoring. I know that Deutsche Bank, Unilever, Shell, and a number of other companies have similar kind of reverse mentorship programs. I think it's really an excellent way to get feedback. It does require quite a lot of transparency and an ability from the senior leaders to give more junior staff the confidence to actually give proper feedback. Otherwise, I think it can be quite hard. So I think it's a very valuable strategy, but it has to be done with some support and structure so that people feel protected and actually celebrated.
Absolutely. Now, maybe the last question for today evening, Dr. Amelie, is that I think one of the things that we're seeing, maybe as a result of, because I think you're mentioning about COVID pandemic and things like that. I think one, I won't say good or bad, but then definitely one consequence of pandemic has been the fact that people have started doing some sort of moonlighting, or they become part of your gig economy, whatever you call it, right? But the point is that I think instead of developing new skills, you get to see that the person is actually working in 2-3 different companies at the same time with the same skill, right?
Yeah.
So therefore, how do you see that? Because we get to see that in India, right? We get to see in, at least we get to read about this one in other countries as well. Not that anyway, any company or any country for that matter is giving less importance to new skills, but I think parallelly, you also get to see the emergence of even powerful gig economy, and some companies, in fact, going to the extent saying that yes, moonlighting is also allowed.
Yeah. So, I mean, moonlighting to me, I mean, there are legal consequences. Obviously, you need to be absolutely upfront with your employer if you're going to take money from another employment, and everybody needs to be kind of in agreement
Right.
on that.
Right.
However, having multiple jobs, I think, is simply the new reality. I mean, as we've discussed, I'm a full-time employee of Standard Chartered, and I take no other revenue than from Standard Chartered. But that doesn't mean that, if there's another way for me to be valuable in doing something, either as an educator or as a leader, that I wouldn't go to my boss and say, listen, I really want to do this, and I think it's going to give me huge experience that I can bring back to Standard Chartered. I mean, they're typically very supportive of that, as am I. I mean, I have somebody on my team is an interior designer
Wow.
in her spare time. Another one of my team is a part-time rugby coach for various kind of youth teams. I mean, I think people pursuing their skills in different areas can only be beneficial. That's why I was a huge fan of the Google 20% time, which I used for myself, to huge effect. So Google's rule was you can spend 20% of your time on something that's not work related. I was at Google, I was the treasurer for I did a lot of startup mentoring. I went around schools as part of the Google Cardboard or the Google Glass experiment. And none of these things were particularly related to my role, but they've all really enhanced my ability to lead and my ability to understand the world that I'm seeing around me. So I'm a huge fan of that. And I think employers that try to catch and keep their employees are kind of missing the point. Right. Like that idea that you come and we mustn't let them leave until they've broken even or they've really contributed value, and let's not try to keep them there forever and ever. I think the employees that think that way need to start to maybe reconsider and think instead, well, how do we get value out of our employees such that we're happy for them to leave, come back again, go sideways, go out part-time, come back. I mean, we have to be, as employers, much more comfortable, much more comfortable with this idea that somebody works for us because they enjoy it and they get value out of it, and much more open to the fact that actually when they have other experiences, that helps us too.
Absolutely. I think from flexi timings, it will be flexi employee will take.
I agree. Which is what I find really exciting. And,
Yeah.
I said this at the beginning. I think you can either see these things with a sense of dread or with a sense of enthusiasm and optimism. And I'm very much, the latter. I think it's cool. I think there's unlimited opportunities for us to reimagine how we work that benefits both the employer and the employee.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Amelie, and thank you
You.
so much for joining us, especially on Saturday, and
Thank
most
you.
importantly, with all of your technical challenges. Appreciate your time, and I look forward to having you once again for another interesting topic. And from all of our participants who again have joined us, because in India today is I think blockbuster day, Dr. Amelie, because there's a match between India and Pakistan. But despite that,
Oh my
we have
goodness, I can't compete with that.
exactly,
Thank you very much. I
exactly.
apologize
No, not
in
at all.
advance.
I think that only show demonstrate their love for learning, their love for what they can do for the career, and
Wow.
that's what it means for me, at least for us, at least. But thank you for all from
Thank
all of us, from all of our participants for taking time, despite some of the technical glitches that you had. But hopefully, we will see you for another session in a bigger screen and for a longer time.
I would love that. Thank you again. All the best, whichever team you're rooting for, and have a wonderful rest of your Saturday.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Take care.
much. Thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank all of you. Have a happy rest of the weekend.